All right, welcome. Today, we're diving into a war that didn't just change history, it literally, and I mean literally, redrew the world map. It created a brand new country in what was basically 13 days of all out lightning fast war. This is the incredible story of how Bangladesh was born.
And that question, really, is at the very heart of what we're talking about today. You know, we tend to think of borders on a map as these fixed, permanent things. But the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War is this incredible, dramatic reminder that borders can be totally erased and redrawn by conflict, by ambition, and by the absolute unbreakable will of a people fighting for their identity.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the bizarre geography that kind of set the stage for this whole thing. Then the election that lit the fuse. After that, the absolutely brutal crackdown that followed, and how India finally stepped in. Then it gets even crazier with a global superpower standoff. And we'll finish with a massive, historic surrender that ended it all.
Okay, so to really get this war, you have to look at a map from back then. See, after the partition of India in 1947, the country of Pakistan was created in two separate chunks of land. You had West Pakistan, and then over 1,000 miles of India in between, you had East Pakistan. I mean, right away you can see how this was a geographical and cultural recipe for total disaster.
But the roots of this division, they were planted way, way before that. British colonial policies back in 1909 started separating communities politically. And by 1947, this led to a partition that basically mashed two completely different peoples together, separated by a massive country and a totally different culture. It was just decades of tension waiting to explode. Now, what's really fascinating here is the sheer power imbalance. I mean, look at this. West Pakistan had all the political power, all the military might, even though East Pakistan had most of the population. The folks in the West basically looked down on the Bengalis in the East, treating them as inferior, taking their resources, and trying to stamp out their language and culture. It was a single country in name only. All that simmering resentment, well, it was about to boil over. And the catalyst? Well, it was a democratic election that the powerful military establishment in the West simply refused to accept. So in 1970, for the first time, Pakistan held a real, free, and fair general election across both wings of the country. And the result? It was a landslide, absolutely undeniable. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, a Bengali leader from the East, won a clear majority. By every single democratic rule, he was supposed to be the next prime minister of all of Pakistan. And this quote, man, it just says it all. It perfectly captures the pure arrogance of the West Pakistani leadership. Instead of honoring the results, instead of a peaceful transfer of power, they arrested Sheikh Mujib. The man who won the election, the man who should have been leading the country, was thrown into a prison cell. And that single act of betrayal lit a fire across East Pakistan, sparking massive protests and calls for freedom. So this political crisis was about to spiral into an almost unimaginable human tragedy. The military response from West Pakistan was swift, it was organized, and it was utterly, utterly brutal. The military launched something called Operation Searchlight. And let me be clear, this wasn't a police action. It was a systematic campaign of terror and genocide. General Tika Khan, who would become known as the Butcher of Bangladesh, unleashed his forces on unarmed civilians. They specifically targeted universities, they targeted intellectuals, students, anyone connected to the Bengali nationalist movement. The atrocities were so horrific that millions of refugees started pouring across the border into India, creating one of the worst humanitarian crises of the 20th century. But the Bengali people, they did not just submit, they fought back. A guerrilla army, the Mukti Bahini, which means liberation army, rose up from the villages, the cities, everywhere, fueled by horrific stories of what was happening to their families, and secretly armed by India, they began a fierce, desperate fight for their homeland. These weren't just soldiers, they were fathers, sons, and brothers, fighting to avenge their loved ones. Meanwhile, the refugee crisis was completely overwhelming India. With millions of people to care for and a full-blown genocide happening right on its border, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi made the fateful decision. India had to intervene. This wasn't just about helping a neighbor. It was now a matter of India's own national security. So, to go to war, India knew it had to neutralize Pakistan's biggest naval threat, a powerful submarine called the PNS Ghazi. So they set this brilliant trap. They faked radio signals. They even bought huge amounts of food in the port city of Visakhapatnam, all to make it look like their prized aircraft carrier, the INS Vikrant, was there. And the Ghazi took the bait. But waiting for it in the dark was the Indian destroyer INS Rajput, which, even with a faulty engine, ambushed and sank the sub. Just like that, Pakistan's most feared naval weapon was at the bottom of the sea. Okay, now look at these numbers. Seriously, this is the stuff of legends. Over on the Western Front, in the middle of the desert, a single Indian company of just 120 soldiers found themselves staring down an entire Pakistani armored brigade. That's 6,000 men and over 100 tanks. Their orders from high command were simple and made perfect sense: retreat. But their commander, Major Kuldeep Singh Champuri, he refused to pull back. He invoked the warrior spirit of his Sikh faith and decided to make a stand. Now, they had anti-tank mines, but nowhere near enough. So they got creative. They buried their metal lunchboxes, their tiffin boxes, in the sand. In the dark, the Pakistani tanks advanced. They hit a few of the real mines, and then the whole column just ground to a halt, completely terrified that the entire desert was one giant minefield. This amazing bluff held them off all night long, until the Indian Air Force could arrive at dawn and just decimate them. Incredible.
So as Pakistan's forces started to crumble on both fronts, the war suddenly went global. You see, the United States was an ally of Pakistan, and they were not about to just sit back and watch their partner get completely defeated.
In a really shocking move, President Nixon sent the American 7th Fleet, led by a nuclear-armed aircraft carrier, steaming towards the Bay of Bengal. This was a clear act of what's called gunboat diplomacy. It was a direct, unmistakable threat to India. Back off or face the full might of the U.S. Navy. But India had an ace up its sleeve, a brand new treaty of friendship with the Soviet Union. As the American fleet approached, a Soviet fleet, including nuclear submarines, sailed in to intercept them. For a few terrifying days, Soviet and American warships shadowed each other, creating a high-stakes nuclear standoff right there in the Indian Ocean. The Soviets basically drew a line in the water, and the American fleet, facing the very real possibility of starting World War III, backed down. This moment just perfectly illustrates the mood in India. Even as air raid sirens were blaring in the capital city of Delhi, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi remained completely unshaken. When her aides suggested she should probably cancel a public speech, she flat out refused. Her calm, her absolute confidence in her military, it just resonated across the entire country.
So with Pakistan's army in the east now completely surrounded, its navy crippled, its air force outmatched, and its biggest international ally neutralized at sea, the end was very, very near.
Just look at that number, 93,000. On December 16, 1971, in the city of Dhaka, 93,000 Pakistani soldiers laid down their weapons and surrendered to the Indian Army. To this day, it remains the largest military surrender by number of prisoners since the end of World War II.
And this right here is such a crucial final point. This victory wasn't won by just one group. The chief of the entire Indian army was a Parsi. The general who accepted the surrender in Dhaka was a Sikh. The man who actually negotiated the terms of that surrender was Jewish. And the air commander defending the capital was a Muslim. It was just this powerful, undeniable demonstration of India's secular strength and its unity.
So we end where we began. A map was redrawn. A new nation, Bangladesh, was born from fire, and a brutal regime was defeated. It really shows that when a people are united in their cause for freedom, and when they are aided by others who see the justice in that cause, even the most powerful oppressors can and will be overcome.